Hello, welcome to Know Bible for Self. Today we are diving into one of the most famous, yet most misunderstood, stories in the entire Bible, the story of Jonah, disobedience, divine intervention, and God's unlimited second chances. The Book of Jonah is a literary masterpiece that teaches us less about a great fish, and everything about a great God, a God whose mercy is so vast it challenges our deepest prejudices. This book is a theological slap in the face to anyone who thinks God's grace is exclusive to their own group. The book's power lies not in its miracles, but in the glaring contrast between the prophet's bitter narrowness and the Creator's universal compassion. Part 1: The Call and the Great Disobedience. Jonah 1. The book begins with a clear, specific, and terrifying command from God to the prophet Jonah, the son of Amittai, who lived around the 8th century B.C. 1. The command to Nineveh. God commanded Jonah, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." The target, Nineveh, was the capital of Assyria, the most brutal and feared empire of the ancient world, known for its extreme violence and oppression of Israel. To Jonah, Assyria was the personification of evil, the enemy he most desired to see destroyed. The problem: God was not asking Jonah to condemn Nineveh. God was asking him to offer Nineveh a chance at repentance. Jonah was a prophet of Israel, and he knew that God was gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Jonah 4:2. He didn't want his enemies to be saved. He wanted them judged out too. The flight of disobedience. Jonah's response was immediate and profound disobedience. He didn't argue or protest. He ran in the opposite direction. The destination: God commanded him to go east to Nineveh in modern Iraq. Jonah fled west to Joppa, paid a fare, and boarded a ship sailing for Tarshish in modern Spain. Tarshish was the known end of the Western world. This is the insider secret of the prophet. Jonah was trying to outrun the presence of God. The consequence: as soon as Jonah was comfortable, lying fast asleep in the ship's hold, God hurled a mighty wind onto the sea, creating a storm so severe that even the experienced pagan sailors feared for their lives. The sailors, ironically, displayed greater piety than the prophet, calling out to their own gods. When they discovered Jonah was the cause, he confessed his flight and asked them to throw him overboard to save themselves. The moral lesson: this is the first great lesson of the book. There is no place, no corner of creation, where we can hide from the presence and the purpose of God. Disobedience always leads to the storm, not only for the disobedient person but often for those around them. Part 2: The Second Chance and the Deep Prayer. Jonah 1:17-10. The sailors reluctantly threw Jonah into the churning sea. The storm immediately ceased, proving that Jonah was the cause. But God was not finished. 3. The divine deliverance. The biblical text states simply, "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah." Jonah 1:17. The miracle: this is the story's most famous miracle, a singular act of divine providence. God did not send a pre-existing creature. He provided a fish specifically for this task. Jonah was trapped in the dark, vile, watery belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. The prayer of the deep. From the depths of this darkness, Jonah prayed one of the most remarkable prayers in the Bible, a prayer of repentance, gratitude, and theological insight. He recognized he was at the gates of the grave and cried out to God, acknowledging that salvation comes from the Lord. Jonah 2:09. This confession is the moment of his spiritual turnaround. The second chance: after the prayer, God commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. The moral lesson here is the promise of the gospel: divine grace pursues us even into the grave. God's mercy is greater than our rebellion. This entire episode is a spectacular metaphor for death, burial, and resurrection. Part 3: The Obedience and Unwanted Revival. Jonah 3. Jonah was given a second chance and a second command. 4. The second command and the reluctant prophet. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time: "Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you." The obedience: this time, Jonah obeyed. He walked into the vast, foreign, enemy capital city of Nineveh, a metropolis so large it took 3 days to walk across. Jonah's message was blunt and short: 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. The result, instant revival. The response of the Ninevites is one of the greatest acts of national repentance in history. The Ninevites believed God. They proclaimed a fast from the king down to the animals. The king of Nineveh descended from his throne, covered himself in sackcloth, and sat in dust, urging everyone to turn from their evil ways and violence. The common mistake is to underestimate the spiritual power of a clear message of judgment and grace. The pagan Ninevites repented faster and more completely than the prophet who preached to them. 5. God's compassion. The chapter ends with a glorious statement of God's nature. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, He relented and did not bring on them the destruction He had threatened. Part 4. The bitter pride. Jonah's crisis of compassion. Jonah, for the final chapter, is the true theological punch of the book and the source of its eternal relevance. 6. Jonah's anger. Jonah was not happy. He was furious that God had shown mercy to his enemies. The complaint. Jonah complained to God, citing the very theological truth he hated. This is what I knew you would do. That is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Jonah's problem was not with God's power, but with God's universal mercy. He wanted mercy for Israel, but judgment for Assyria. The moral crisis. The moral lesson is stark. It is easier to accept God's sovereignty than it is to accept God's compassion for our enemies. Jonah's pride was wounded because his prophecy of destruction did not come true, and his prejudice was exposed because God showed love where Jonah wished for hate. 7. The gourd and the ultimate question. God uses a final teaching moment to expose Jonah's petty self-centeredness. The gourd. God provided a fast-growing gourd plant to shade Jonah from the hot sun, and Jonah was grateful for it. The next day, God sent a worm to destroy the plant, and Jonah became angry about the loss of his comfort. The ultimate question. The pro tip. God asks Jonah, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. Should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left hand, also many animals?" The book ends abruptly, leaving the question hanging in the air. The question is directed not just at Jonah, but at the reader. Is your compassion limited to your own comfort and your own group? Conclusion. The sign of Jonah. The story of Jonah is ultimately a prophecy of Jesus Christ. When the Pharisees asked Jesus for a miraculous sign, he replied, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Matthew 12:40. Jonah's 3 days in the darkness foreshadowed Christ's death and resurrection, the ultimate sign of God's second chance for the entire world. The moral lesson of the book is that God's grace is not a finite resource to be guarded, but an oceanic love to be celebrated and shared, even with the people we dislike the most. If this deep dive into Jonah has challenged your own prejudices and reminded you of God's universal mercy, please hit the like button and subscribe to Know Bible for Self. What Nineveh in your life, a person or group you judge harshly, does God want you to show compassion to today? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.